Good afternoon. This is Kevin Brown. Welcome to the special Superintendent's Webcast on April 28th, 2020. We have a full agenda, of course, for you today. I know a lot of you are awaiting guidance on various issues, and so I won't belabor that. We'll get on to the agenda. Just a brief overview of the agenda. We have a communications update on the project we're working on to celebrate the class of 2020. Tony Cons-Tapman will provide an update there. The large bulk of the agenda will be from the Office of Finance and Operations on fiscal year 20 wrap up and fiscal year 21 planning, also involving SEEK issues. And then we also have some guidance for you on the class of 2020 graduation and the end of school year procedures. I know I promised you a document by close of business yesterday. We are still finalizing the actual document. We're going to be giving you an overview of the guidance on the webinar today, but the actual guidance document will be coming out hopefully within the next 24 hours or so. We're waiting confirmation of some things, working with the governor's office and Department of Public Health. We want to make sure the guidance is accurate. And as you know, some of these things are changing day by day. So I ask for your patience. However, we will have a verbal overview of that guidance on today's webcast. And then, of course, as always, we have the question and answers. You please use the soapbox feature that will be at the bottom of your screen with the hashtag KDE COVID. So Tony, we'll turn it over to you for our first update.
So I'm just going to keep sharing the screen here for a moment and go to the next slide. So about a week ago, I had sent you, oh, hold on a second, maybe I can't share. Let's see. I had sent you the email asking all the superintendents to send me or to forward my email onto your principals to ask for photos, up to 10 photos. We're working on a special project to honor our seniors, and we need the help of our districts and our superintendents. And so we're looking for up to 10 photos. We're trying to include as many group photos with as many different faces as possible. And the deadline to submit these photos is May 15th. You all are doing a great job. I'm looking at 71 responses at 71 individual districts already out of 172, and not all of our districts are K-12. So we already have 570 photos that have been submitted. I don't really want to share too much about the special project that we're working on yet, because it is still in the works. But I will say that this is something special that our office, KDE, Lieutenant Governor's office, and the governor's office, we want to do something special to honor our seniors. In addition, we've been asked by CNN to share pictures of our seniors and a flashback of this year. And we're honored to be asked to participate in that as well. So with that, if you have any questions, you can, if you did not get the email from me, I am asking the districts to submit these photos to me. So not from students or parents, but district accounts. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. And then I think, Robin, you are up next.
Thank you, Tony. Good afternoon. My name is Robin Kinney, and I'm the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Finance and Operations. It's a pleasure to again be online with you today. Today's presentation, we're going to focus on fiscal year 20, which is this school year, and the wrap up of this school year, and fiscal year 21, next school year, planning efforts as it relates to operations and finance. You'll see on the agenda that I kind of started with an agenda bullet point that is minutes, hours, and days, because we've got lots of questions surrounding NTI hours, sort of the education continuation plan, how that's affected, and days. We're going to include calendar impacts in that discussion, emergency time, and our upcoming calendars, contract days, extra pay. It's going to sound a little bit like a hodgepodge of lots of different things, but what we've attempted to do is, as we listen to your questions and concerns and then try to create our next presentation for you, we want to share across as many districts as possible sort of the questions that we are answering and guidance that we're providing. We're also going to talk about SEEK fiscal year 21 next school year, and Senate Bill 177, how that is impacting determinations on SEEK, and then a catch-all at the end for finance. I do want to share with you that today's presentation, in the interest of time, and also because we have so many things that we'd really like to touch on very briefly, it is going to be fairly high level. But I do want to also announce today that we feel the need to dig a little deeper and have more technical questions answered for some of your finance officers and for your DPPs. We are getting questions from them, and the number of questions and the types of questions, we'd like to dedicate a little more time and special environment for them. So this Thursday, April 30th, from 10 to 11:30, your finance officers will receive an invite for finance officers to attend and participate in a Teams meeting with the district support staff here to answer questions related to district finance. And on Thursday, April 30th, the same day, later in the afternoon from 2 to 3:30, we'll be doing a webcast for, we'll be doing a Teams meeting for the DPPs, their own team meeting. Of course, superintendents are always welcome to attend these meetings as we roll along as well. But, and if you have a DPP that wants to attend a finance meeting or vice versa, they are more than welcome. We want to continue to provide regular upcoming information to you. And we found that designating separate times and regular team meetings for those special groups, that would probably be advantageous for all of us. So please make sure that your finance officers and your DPPs are aware of these dates and times. Next slide, please. Let's start with a little bit on the education continuation plan. I think with the education continuation plan, as we all realize, it was announced on April 20th, 2020. And part of that was in an attempt, we were hearing lots of feedback from districts about challenges with operating and continuing to sustain operations of NTI as originally envisioned. And we're very fortunate that we have the NTI program. It was already in place, but we all know that it was really not designed, at least initially, and we are getting a lot better as each day goes on, but initially not to go for a significant length of time. We also were hearing from districts about the fatigue of staff and families and students, and really trying to balance those concerns that we were hearing with a strong desire to continue good instruction for students and continue to provide that structure that so many of our students and families need by having an ongoing instructional environment for them. So with the education continuation plan, and seeing where we are in this coronavirus pandemic, and recognizing that it would have been very difficult for us to come back for in-person instruction in our school buildings, we made that determination and assumption that school closure for in-person instruction would continue for the rest of the year. At the same time, districts must continue to provide that NTI program for students and continue to reach that 1062 in student instructional hours prior to May 29th. That does permit districts that reach 1062 hours to end their school year on or before May 29th. And very importantly, I think, in the education continuation plan, NTI days were granted the ability to count for 7 hours of daily instruction. Response to that provision has been very favorable from local school districts that we have talked with. And it is our belief that most school districts will meet that 1062 hours in the mid-May point. Next slide, please. There are still some exceptions under Senate Bill 177 if a district is unable to reach the 1062. That should be for extraordinary circumstances or logistical hardships, or intervening public health considerations. So we do recognize that some districts have been heavily impacted as far as their staffing are concerned. And, you know, you're trying to juggle diagnosis that may occur with the pandemic, self-quarantine and or self-isolation and quarantine. So there is a possibility that some districts may find themselves in a unique circumstance, but we really believe for most districts, this new education continuation plan will allow you to recognize those maximum instruction hours. Under those extraordinary circumstances, Senate bill still provides that you could request assistance from the commissioner, or the governor could determine to cease NTI prior to reaching the 1062 hours. We see those as remote, but those are still possible. And I've included just a link to the education continuation plan at the bottom of that slide for your easy reference. Next slide, please. As a result of the education continuation plan, we have had some questions relating around calendars. And so I'd like to turn the presentation over to Rhonda Devine. Rhonda works with school calendars on a daily basis and will be a familiar name and face to your DPPs. And I'll let her talk through some issues related to school calendars.
Good afternoon. My name is Rhonda Devine with the Division of District Support, and I'm going to discuss the 2019-20 school calendars. NTI instructional minutes traditionally follow the instructional minutes in the school schedule. Given the circumstances for the school year, school districts have the ability to count each NTI day as 420 minutes, even if their regular school day was less time. This also applies to all NTI days for the entire school year. Last week, we sent guidance to the DPPs for the process for making the change in Infinite Campus. We also instructed the DPPs to run the calendar summary report, which will reflect the total instructional minutes for the school year. This report will count the time for NTI days to help determine when a district has reached the 1,062 instructional hours to figure out the last day of school. The calendar report that districts are accustomed to using currently does not reflect the change to count the NTI day as 420 minutes, but Infinite Campus is currently working on an enhancement which will reflect the 420 minutes. We will notify the districts when the update is made. So any bank time or increased gain due to the 420 minutes will count toward the 1,062 hours of instruction. But this does not change the contract days. If the instructional day is longer than usual, it is still counted as one day. The staff must fulfill the 185-day contract. So the minutes in the day don't change the required 185-day contract. Next slide, please. Districts are entitled to the 5 emergency hours to count toward the 1,062 hours of instruction. If there was an early release or they started school late due to an emergency, anytime throughout the school year, they can use up to 5 emergency hours. The example is showing if one day the schools were released 1 hour early and another day they had a 2-hour delay, then the school can use 3 emergency hours for that school year. So now their instructional hours are 1,059 with the 3 hours of emergency, giving them that 1,062 instructional hours that's required. Next slide, please. The 2021 original calendars can be submitted this year by July 31st. We extended the submission time from June 30th, which is the usual submission date, to July 31st to give extra time this year. The 1920 amended calendar was also extended to July 31st as well. But for the amended calendars, district must make sure they don't submit their amended calendar until they are completely done with school, and that includes their contract days. Next, we'll have Donna Duncan, who will also discuss contract days.
Good afternoon. This is a perfect segue going from the calendar for the kids to the teachers with their contract days. As Rhonda just mentioned, we still expect for your teachers and your employees to meet their contract days. And I think probably even at this point, you've already been searching for creative ways to do that, to make sure that you hit those days. So I know that from the questions we've received in, this has certainly been something you've been considering. Obviously professional development is a good use of time to help meet the days. And we encourage you to do that and to seek those opportunities. Teachers can also use these days for planning. When you start trying to classify something as hazardous duties, you can run afoul of the retirement rules. So that's really, again, with contract days, please try to fulfill those contracts in the ways that you can. And for extra pay, it's no change in the rules on that. Next slide, please.
Donna, can we just pause for a second? We're having reports of some technical difficulty, so let's just stand by for a few minutes and we'll get a go ahead here. Are we good? Okay, we're back. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, Kevin, I was going to say this might be a good time for someone to crack a joke, but since we're back on YouTube, I guess we'll go on with the
No, I'm next, Donna, and my heart is racing. I've been running up down the stairs seeing my internet connection was lost. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm next and I'm lost.
Oh dear, Steve, don't make me do Redbook.
Well, no, I'm back now, but my whole connection went down. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm next.
All right, I'll turn it over to you, my friend.
So let me jump in for just a minute. Let's stop there. We are going to go into what I kind of referenced before as being some hodgepodge of things. These are things that we are getting questions from local school districts and wanted to make sure that we have included. So we're going to talk about, for just a minute, about activity funds as you close out the school year. And Steve Lyles, I hope your heart isn't as pounding as loud as mine, because I had also lost connection and now I'm back. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve to talk about activity funds, and particularly as it relates to our senior activity funds. Go ahead, Steve.
Yes, as you will notice on the slide there, the very first bullet is not dealing with senior funds. So we'll kick off with that one. Good to see everyone. Even though I can't see you, you can see me. So it's been a while since we've touched base with finance officers around the state there. So it's good to be talking with you once again. So here we go with talking about Redbook once again. So we're talking about returning fees and dues to payers. So what that first bullet is talking about is things that may have come up in the springtime that may not have come to fruition yet. We're talking about clubs and sports and things that didn't get off the ground before the shutdown. We're talking about, sports such as maybe baseball and archery that maybe didn't finish the season. And this is maybe not necessarily due to COVID, but it's just things that didn't get to finish or maybe even start because of the shutdown. So those are on a district by district basis, obviously, things that you may want to take a look at. There's nothing special here. I just wanted to point those out that you may want to take a look at some of those items because of some of the clubs that may only be spring involved or late winter, early spring involved. So, look at maybe possibly turning some of those dues and fees that were collected in those clubs. So that's what that first bullet is. But the main thing we want to talk about today is obviously the senior funds, because I've received, and a lot of my staff has received, questions about senior funds. What do we do with those? And those include a multitude of items, basically prom things, as well as senior trips, and there are probably some other things there, but those are the biggies that we hear about. How can we spend those monies down, or can we carry them forward? So here's what we're going to tell you today, but there's possibly some additional guidance coming down the road. So currently, what can we do with those? Redbook states specifically some different things that you can do with those monies. And the main thing is you can transfer those. I'm going to drop down to the last two bullets and we'll come back up to the to the third one, to the middle one next. But the senior class can vote to transfer those to other student activity funds. If they want to donate those to next year's class, that's an option. If they want to donate those to other funds in the school, that's also an option. Or at the end of the year, what's currently in Redbook is they can allow those to just roll into the general fund. So I know in 99.99% of the cases, that's not what's going to be chosen. So just wanted to let you know that those are two of the options. Now, the main option that's going to be chosen is the one that's in the middle there, spending on allowable expenses. And the allowable expenses are laid out on page 19 of the Redbook. And number 2 specifically lays out one that I have reached out to our Redbook committee that helped us revise it last year. And it spells out awards such as merit certificates, trophies, plaques, and other means of recognition for behavior, athletic, or academic achievement. So all that to say that when your senior class officers come together and decide what to do with them, with the remaining funds, that's what you can choose. So currently under Redbook rules, without KDE providing any waivers, anything extra for you to do, you can choose number 2 under allowable expenditures. So that doesn't allow gift cards, and that doesn't allow you provide cash to your seniors or anything like that. But the seniors can choose to purchase items with those, whether it be T-shirts, yard signs, mugs, things like that. And I've even put out there, Chromebooks and things like that. But if it's things that the seniors choose and it's an allowable expense, and those things would be that I just mentioned, they can do those currently, and Redbook rules don't need to be waived. Now, we are looking at possible other scenarios or options that may fall into future academic years or fiscal years. So we're not there yet, but those are things that we may have further guidance on in the days and maybe week or so ahead. But what you can do currently is what we have on the screen there, and so that's the guidance we have at the moment. And I know a lot of schools are probably wanting to go ahead and make decisions, and that's perfectly fine because that's what we have available at the moment. But we may have some additional guidance or additional options for you down the road if there's a little bit of patience available. So that's what I have on Redbook. But while I've got your attention, I want to also provide you with a little teaser on what's available on Thursday at our Teams meeting. We're also going to have some additional answers on coding and questions, and also GASB 84 reporting, and also some additional guidance on school report cards. So that's what I have for today, and I appreciate everyone's attention and look forward to seeing you again on Thursday. Thanks. And I think it's back to Robin.
Thank you, Steve. Before we get back to Robin, we've actually asked that we have an encore performance by Donna. It was so good, Donna, they want to hear it again. Those that were on and then those that were off heard how good it was, and they didn't hear any of your presentation, and they want to hear it. So if you can just do a short recap of your slides for those that missed it. We had a little bit, for those that were off, we had some technical difficulties, as you know, and we got back on. And you don't have to do the whole presentation, but if you'll just hit the highlights, I think that would be good.
I'd be happy to, Kevin, and I'm proud to say now that I can actually say that I broke the internet, can't I? Okay, what I had talked about, and I don't know who heard what of the presentation, were basically 2 things that affect more or less your staff. And the first was contract days. As you will recall, we just finished up talking about calendars, and that really affects the school year. And we talked a little bit about contract days. And even though the school year may have wrapped up with the 1,062 days, you still need to work with your staff, your classified and certified staff, to meet their contract days. And I'm sure you've already been looking at this and working on this. And in some ways, it's not like other years where maybe you've had a lot of illnesses or you've had a lot of snow days or whatever, trying to find different kind of activities to fill those days. Professional development is certainly something that we would strongly encourage. Teachers can be planning not only for closing down for this year, but even doing some preliminary planning for next year and considering the different options that might come into play depending on where we are with the pandemic at that point. We, as an example, have been working very closely with your pupil transportation staff, your transportation directors and bus drivers, and providing a lot of online training and activities for them. Just about every week, Elisa Hanley and her folks have been reaching out to transportation staff, and that's going very well. You also have the capacity under Senate Bill 177 to grant emergency leave to your full or part-time staff. This is in addition to the 3 days of emergency leave that you already had the capacity to do. And it doesn't have some of the restrictions that the current statute regarding emergency days does have. Instead of trying to go into a lot of that right now, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to go out on the KSBA's site and pick up their FAQs on this. I think it's written pretty much in layman's terms, and it's very helpful in determining what you need to do to grant those days of leave. The next thing that we talked about, the next slide, was on extra pay. And I guess the main message for me to leave you with this is that there is no change in the rules regarding extra pay from what it was even before COVID-19 became part of our lexicon. If your staff has worked extra hours, but the same duties, they get paid overtime. So that's no different from what you have today. If they take on extra duties, they may be paid a stipend for those additional duties. And again, that's what you've been operating under all along. And again, what you've also operated under is that bonuses are not permitted. The pay must be for services rendered. This is not new. It has been with us throughout time. If you have situations, and we know of some situations, for example, where some districts were wanting to incentivize bus drivers to not miss. So as long as by the first of the school year, they had set up a program to incentivize perfect attendance, it's okay because it's for everybody and it's outside their contract. But you can't, at the end of a year or somewhere in the year, change the rules and try to offer bonuses. That's just not allowed. I know all of our folks are working hard and we want to reward them, but you have to do it within the confines of the law. So that's really all I had to say. Just again, encourage you to try to make your contract days as best you can, and to leave you with the word that the rules regarding pay and overtime and additional duties haven't changed. I will say too, on that front, we've had some districts that tried to see if they could offer hazardous duty pay, especially for people delivering meals. That should not be called hazardous duty pay. It's an additional duty or perhaps extra hours, but typically additional duties. When you start talking about hazardous duty, you run into issues with retirement systems. So don't try to classify them as that. I think that's pretty close to what I said the first time.
I think it was, Donna, and I think it may have been better than the first time. So you had a great encore there. I think I'm hearing that everybody heard that. I think we were still having a few note to our tech staff, a little bit of cutting in and out. So if you all want to troubleshoot that. And I will add, while we have you on, Donna, I may have caused some confusion last week. We were talking about how adding those hours to NTI could result in a district getting finished, obviously shaving a few instructional days off, but it could leave them with some extra contract days. And I think that was confusing to some superintendents that that you could also use the 1062 is a separate item than the contract days. That when we're granting you the 7-hour flexibility on NTI, that does not go towards your contract days for your teachers, other staff, which is what you just said. But I want to remind individuals that we have that relief in Senate Bill 177 using emergency days. And you may be also confusing it with, in previous General Assemblies, there has been some language talking about how some of the relief for snow days in previous years would also account for the contract days. And so that has been a remedy that General Assemblies of the past, I think, have added in. But this year, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff, the way that you can alleviate your contract day issue is through the granting of emergency days, and that is a separate issue from the using the 7 hours for 1062.
That's my understanding as well.
That's correct, and that would be the emergency day provisions found in Senate Bill 177.
So Robin, you can take it over from here.
Okay, Tony, I think we're on the slide entitled Capital Funds Request. Yeah, thank you very much. Also, as a reminder, capital funds request, as we are closing out this school year, wanted to remind you that the last day for requests for this school year is May 30th. KRS 157-420 provides the guidance for allowable expenditures. We've also had a few questions about what that looks like in the next school year. And just like where we are operating right now for fiscal year 21, the next school year, you can still make those capital funds requests in accordance with KRS 157-420, and the allowable expenditures are set forth on the slide. But you cannot use those to pay operating expenditures because the General Assembly, although there was some versions that were kind of going through the General Assembly this time, that did not make it into the last budget bill. So for fiscal year 21, for planning purposes, no operating expenditures allowed and out of the capital funds requests. Next slide, please. As we wind up sort of the finances, I'm going to have Jesse Carlton talk to us just for a minute about the school report card. This is for the finance tab for this year. This is the provision that is required under ESSA, and she's going to report out to us on how we're going to handle school report card to finish for this year, relying upon that data from last year, and then as we move forward. Jesse, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to jump in and start talking about actually school report cards starting next year for what you will see on your 1920 school report card. Senate Bill 177, we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, gives you the ability to look at your SAAR data for either 1819 or 1920, and that option is going to cause a little confusion of what we're going to use on school report card. So what we're going to do is, since districts are going to have this option to use either 1819 data or 1920 SAAR data, we're going to have a mix of people who don't necessarily all have the same 1920 membership data. And the membership data point is really what I'm talking about right now. Normally that membership data point is calculated through the SAAR process, but this year we're going to have to pull membership data directly from Infinite Campus. So it's going to be calculated the same way. It's going to be enrollments minus withdrawals, and that's giving you the enrollments on your last day of school. And it's going to be important, even if you don't use your 1920 SAAR data for calculating funding this year, which I believe Che and some others are going to talk about here in a few minutes. You need to clean up your data in Infinite Campus because we're still going to be pulling that data out to calculate a membership for you. We need to have a membership data point to put on the school report card because it's used in other areas for calculations, such as finance. I know when we calculate spending per student, we use that membership data point as a denominator to get that per student number. So that's why we need to have a consistent 1920 data point for everyone. While we can pull that 1920 membership data point out of Infinite Campus, there's some points that we're not going to be able to pull, such as AADA, attendance rates, and chronic absenteeism. They will not be on the 1920 school report card, but that membership data point will. And like all other school report card data points, when we'll have a verification period, when we load that, DPP, superintendents, others who are checking the school report card can look at that membership data point, determine if it's correct, if something in the system needs to be changed. If you find an error with it, you can contact us. We'll re-pull the data and we can get it right during that time. The reminder down there at the bottom that Robin did say, the financial transparency section of the 1819 school report card is actually open right now. There's been guidance that's gone out to finance officers. We're asking you to do three things this year. We're asking you to check the district level data that has been entered by KDE, make sure that's correct, calculate and enter school level spending per student data for all of your A1 schools, and create a district financial narrative. And that district financial narrative is new this year. It is the ability, it gives you a little, about 400 character overview that you can put on your school reports card finance page that gives an overview of your financial situation. So we thought that was something that you all might like to add to your school report card this year, so that's a new feature that's on there. Given the circumstances, normally we would be wrapping up all of that data entry and checking right about now. We've extended that out 3 weeks because we know everybody has a lot going on. So we're asking that districts have all 3 of these items taken care of by May 15th. So next slide, Tony. I think after this, we're going to transition over into talking about SEEK with Che.
Hello, everybody. This is Che. Nice to hear everybody again, I guess. We're going to jump back and forth a little bit because of the way SAAR interacts with SEEK. And we wanted to clarify a lot of what FY21 SEEK will look like, which starts in July. Thank you, Tony. You're right on the right slide as usual. Senate Bill 177 passed. And previously we talked about this a bit, and we started our SEEK using 18-19 attendance data. But let me clear something up because I got a lot of questions on that. That is the data that we used in 1920 SEEK. My email blew up after that last talk we had. And so 18-19 data goes into 1920 SEEK. And in this case, we're pushing it forward into 21 SEEK to sort of start everything out. And another option you have, in which we're going to get into further discussion in a few minutes, is to replace that data with your 1920 attendance data. And this covers your ADA, your at-risk students, which is free lunch only, home hospital, and your T codes. Again, we'll get more detail in just a second on that. The calculation that we've currently got out there will be for your payments in July, August, and September 2020. So a couple months from now, we'll start a new round of payments for the districts. And any changes that we make to ADA, at-risk, home hospital because of anyone using 1920 data won't occur until SEEK tentative, which is usually right toward the end of September, but typically by October 1st. And just a little bit of a quick update that we don't have on the slides. Our exceptional child count numbers will probably change a little bit for your districts. They're still cleaning up some data. They're supposed to get us a new file in the next couple of days. So if you see a minor change out there, that's probably what it is. And of course, also in SEEK tentative by October 1, we should have most of the property assessments. I would say 75%, hopefully, we'll have most of the property assessments in there as well. So it's just remember, tentative is almost final. We're still missing growth and we're still missing some transportation calculations. So there'll be some changes throughout the year, and that's very normal. Again, transportation, we only do that in March 1 of 2021. And then fall growth, as we explained last time, will be calculated normally and included in SEEK final, which is always on March 1 of the following year. So just to summarize, we've got 18-19 data, which was used in 1920 SEEK, and we're using that in 2021 SEEK as a start. Your district has an option to use 1920 attendance data, which we'll get into in just a minute. And I think we're going to jump back to Jesse real quick to talk about SAAR.
Yes. Tony, can we go to the next slide? Okay, here's where we're going to talk about those 2 options that Che was just talking about. Senate Bill 177 has given that option for your attendance data. You can either choose your 18-19 SAAR data to be used, or you can use your 1920 SAAR data. So let's first talk about if you choose to use your 18-19 SAAR data. So if you want your 18-19 SAAR data, all of your attendance data to be used, first and foremost, you're not going to have, your work's already been done for this year. What we're going to do is we're going to take that last SAAR data from 18-19 that was used in the 1920 SEEK, but it was verified by your superintendents, and we're going to use that same data again. That means you're going to receive the same AADA, SEEK at risk data, home hospital adjustments, and transportation data, the data, not necessarily the funding, but the same transportation data that was used in 18-19 will be used again. We'll still need you to do your normal end of the year cleanup, things like correcting overlapping enrollments and end dating your 1920 enrollments, but everything to be verified has already been done. Can we go to the next slide, Tony? So if you decide to use your 1920 SAAR data and you want to process this data, this is a little more in depth. because you're going to have to go through, not only you're going to have to go through the whole end of year process, but you're going to have to process it a little bit differently this year, because our systems will not accept data that comes in that has more than 10 NTI days. And what we're going to do to get around this is we're going to manually process some of that data. So this means when you submit a SAAR file to us, we're going to manually remove the NTI data, let the system calculate ADA for all of the other days, and then we're going to manually calculate the ADA for the NTI data and put those two totals together to get your AADA for the district. This will be a manual calculation, so it'll take longer. So that's why we're asking districts, as you can see here, to get us this 1920 SAAR file by June 1st. Also, we're only going to process this file one time. The DPPs in your district are used to sending us a file, kind of seeing the results, and then looking at the data and kind of going back and forth and saying, oh, I need to clean up, something else. Can you open that file back up and let me send something else back in? With all the manual work that's going to be required to do that this year, we're asking that the file be submitted only one time and by June 1st. To use your 1920 SAAR data, you're going to need to do normal cleanup like you would do every year, which includes validating your 1920 at-risk data with KDE. So we're asking that districts have this choice to use the 1819 or the 1920, and we're asking districts to notify us which ones they're wanting to use by May 15th. And we're going to do that by sending an email to Brad Kennedy in district support. We'll send out more information about this to DPPs so that they know exactly who to contact and by when. If we get word that you would like to process your 1920 SAAR data and use that data, at that point we will begin the validation process to validate the at-risk data like we normally do every year. Okay, it's important to note that if your district decides to use that 1920 SAAR data, the high number of NTI days that we've had in this year is going to affect not only your home hospital adjustments, but your transportation. NTI days use last year's ADA and the calculation for all students, even those who are on home hospital. And it's also important to note that NTI days are calculated as non-transport days, and that means your district's going to receive no ADA for an NTI day. So I think Che is going to talk a little bit more about how those NTI days will affect your transportation. And so we're going to throw it back over to Che.
All right, thank you, Jesse. So if we can go to, there you go, Tony, thank you. If you decide to use the 2019-20 data for your ADA and at-risk, this also will go to your T codes. And there's a likelihood that the change in your transportation funding can be significant. NTI days don't count toward days transported, and the cost related to transporting, not related to transporting students, is not included in that total cost that we use in transportation. This should be coded to 2790, and that formula actually excludes those expenses. So we went and looked multiple times to figure out if we could figure out any scenarios that would point us in a direction to say, there's very minimal impact or a huge impact. And there are over 3,000 variables in the front calculation of transportation. So it's very hard to determine what happens if we do A, B, and C. So quite frankly, we won't know until we run it. And at that point, it's too late to make any changes. So this can also impact because the pool of money for transportation is limited. If a district chooses 1920, if they lose money, that money will go to other districts. And if they gain money, they will be taking money from other districts. It's a very complicated formula. And unfortunately, it's not very clear as what will happen with all these NTI days when some districts are using them and some districts are just using the 1819 data, which was used in 1920 SEEK. Okay, next slide, Tony, please. And I think it's important, we don't absolutely have to read through every one of these verbatim, but I think it's important to go back to this slide before you make your decision. We tried to figure out the pros and cons of each option using your 1819 SAAR data or using your 1920 data. There's some pretty obvious ones. For 1819, you know what the amount is. Your funding is pretty stable at that point. You know what your ADA is and things like that. You don't have to do any data cleanup. Of course, if you decide to use 1920 data, you're going to pick up that end of year growth So for example, one district emailed me just a few minutes ago. They've seen some growth in their attendance and new kids coming into their district. So it's very possible if they use 1920 data, they would gain some students. And, obviously, that's a big deal for a district that gains 20 or 30 students because you have some additional staffing concerns as well. But there are quite a few cons to that too. Some unknown impacts. And like we've said multiple times, once you jump into this swimming pool for 1920 data, you're in. And we'll have to calculate. And once we determine what your funding is, we're kind of stuck with it. Let me hop to the next one here, Tony. But I would take serious time to review those pros and cons. I think it's very important that you have your eyes wide open before your district makes that decision. So important considerations, like I said, this choice is final and we cannot reverse. Once we run the calculation, we've got to start making payments, and to reverse that, it would impact every other district's funding. And we get that you're working on your budgets here in the next week, or if not earlier than that. We really can't quantify the risk here because, like a lot of things going on right now, there are a lot of unknowns. This is only related to SEEK funding and transportation, your ADA. And I know there's federal money coming. We don't know what next January will look like. We don't know what September will look like. And we're trying our best to figure out how will this impact our districts, but we just cannot quantify an amount to say this is the impact to your district. NTI days do not give home and hospital adjustments, as Jesse mentioned, and districts would need to notify Brad Kennedy. I think he's the only Brad Kennedy in our global that's at KDE, and by May 15th. That's a very important date, so make sure you get in touch with Brad or your DPPs do. Okay, Tony, next slide. And I've gotten a couple of emails on, I'll just say rumors at this point of shortfalls. We don't know yet. I don't think anyone has a good feel for if we're going to run right into a huge shortfall or not. But there's really two versions of the shortfall. I'm going to speak more about the SEEK shortfall since it's in my world. When we posted SEEK forecasts on April 7th, a shortfall did not exist. And as we go through the year and we add to our SEEK funding formula, and there's changes in the calculation, and this will come from property assessments that come from the Department of Revenue, any changes to ADA, and then down the road, fall growth and transportation, which impacts your tier 1 funding. These can trigger a shortfall. It can push us kind of over that cliff. But we typically, the minute we know we have a shortfall, we address it with KDE management, and then we will send out a communication to districts as quickly as possible because we realize that you all need to know this very quickly so you can make adjustments. But as of now, we don't have one, and we're going to stay on schedule like we do every year with SEEK. By March 1, we'll have final SEEK out there, and when tentative SEEK is posted in October, we'll take a look once the calculation is finished and see where we stand for the remainder of the year to see how much money we have left over, or if there's a shortfall. Like I said, we'll notify you. Typically in years past, growth factor can trigger it, but it's also a combination of, variables like property assessments came in lower than expected and things like that, and that can push us right over into a shortfall situation. The other version of the shortfall is if there's a state budget reduction, which trickles down obviously from the top and it comes to KDE, and there are some decisions made at a much higher pay grade than mine that sometimes may or may not impact you all. Historically, SEEK has been held harmless in these state budget reductions, so that's a positive, but we simply do not know at this time. Obviously, pay attention to the media and the news because that's who will probably report it pretty quickly if there's some kind of notification from the governor's budget office to say there's a shortfall, but we will communicate that out to you all as well. And I believe I'm handing this back to Robin.
You are. Thank you, Che. I think that as we were preparing for the presentation today, I guess I was very, very thankful that we have such learned staff here in my office, in the Office of Finance and Operations and District Support Services. I will share with you that, and I think many of you have worked very side by side with Che on various issues. I think it's interesting even that when we introduce Che, it's just one name, it's Che, and everybody automatically knows who he is. He has worked closely with SEEK and understands the intricacies as well as the interdependencies of SEEK. And it is, as he sometimes makes sure to remind me, that it's very complicated. There are very few true SEEK scholars, I think, in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, but we're very fortunate to have Che as one of those. So as we prepared our presentation today, I really charged him with trying to explain to the best of our ability sort of the pros and cons, and trying to think to provide as much assurance of what we know at this point, and also to be very transparent on what we don't know. And what we don't know may happen because of the interdependencies of individual districts making decisions related to Senate Bill 177, and how that impacts both them individually as well as the 172 districts in their entirety. So,
hey, Robin, can I interrupt for just a moment?
Sure.
A superintendent had just emailed me, and I think kind of gave me a heads up that I kind of skipped over something I should have mentioned or be clearer on. So
Okay.
shout out to Northern Kentucky for paying attention. If you choose 1819 ADA, we're still going to do fall growth like we normally do, which is going to compare fall of 2020 to fall of 2019. So it really won't, if you do have growth, it would apply to that end of year number that you choose, be it 1819 or 1920. So fall growth will work just the same as it always does. I wanted to be clear on that because I neglected to mention that. So I wanted to clear up any confusion on that. Thank you, Robin.
And Shay, correct me if I'm wrong, but just based upon last year's growth numbers, while we had many districts that saw a little growth, the overall growth was minimal. We have a few districts that saw pretty healthy numbers, but across the board, growth was fairly minimal across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So unfortunately, we're seeing more in the opposite direction, which is that decrease in enrollment, and that's impacting SEEK numbers. So Che, can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think we had about 70 districts that showed growth, but most of them, it's pretty small. You might get a less than 0.5%, and there's usually about, I would say, 10 to 20 districts that have what we'd call significant growth, and most of those districts know exactly who they are. And usually, years ago, growth used to run at 5,000 and 6,000 ADA across the state. Now 3,000 and change is more normal because we've declined so much in recent years.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's stop here. Let's pause here for just a minute and see if Tony, if we have any questions on the soapbox. I'm sure after we've had some discussion on SEEK, that always generates some questions.
Yes, you have lots of questions, so we'll go ahead and start with those. I will go ahead and just start at the top. So we'll go ahead, and the first one is, if you have an early August start date for 2021, will you have to begin with NTI days, or are districts expected to push the start date until August, late August?
I think at this point in time, we still don't have clear indication of whether NTI will be necessary to be utilized at the beginning of the next school year. I think that's still very much fluid at this point based upon where we are with the pandemic itself. And so I think it's a little early to say if we'll have to rely upon NTI at the beginning of the school year, or there may be some kind of alternative structure or pattern. We're starting to hear some conversations at the national level about reentry of school year for the next school year. And I think we need to just all kind of stay tuned to that and continue to learn as this as the crisis still progresses.
All right. The question is, a local board, can they provide an essential worker stipend?
I think as we talk about that, and maybe I'll have, if Todd Allen is on the line with us as well, he may be able to weigh in. But, back to Donna's slide about if it's for additional duties that they're not usually accustomed to doing, then we talk about that in terms of extra duty and pay accordingly. But I think we have to be careful on how we start applying that to different areas of our staffing population.
Robin, this is Todd. I agree with your comment on that. As Donna explained, the issue of paying bonuses or additional pay to school district staff, it's a constitutional issue that we don't have any authority to waive. It's not set forth in statute or in regulation. It's a matter of the state constitution restricting educational funds only for educational purposes. And the courts have told us through the years that we can't go back after the fact and award a bonus or a gift of pay to school employees with educational funds. Instead, if we do that, basically what is happening is we're going back after we already have an agreement in place with our school staff for them to perform services for a certain amount of money that is set forth in their contract and the district salary schedule, and then paying them additional funds for those services that they have already agreed to perform. So the district really needs to ask itself as a preliminary question, are the staff performing services that they are already under contract to perform, or are they being asked to perform some additional services? Continuing to perform their duties that they were already under contract to perform, while that is certainly, appreciated in this type of emergency situation, it is the duties they have already agreed to perform for the school district for a salary that they've already agreed upon.
Okay. All right. The next question, let's see here. Will people entering our buildings after May 11th be required to have masks on? That doesn't necessarily have to do with finance, but Kevin, I think we're going to address this here in a little bit. But the answer to that question, I believe, is yes, because that's going to be, yes, the guidance from the governor's office yesterday. So that May 11th guidance was given yesterday during the mayor's press briefing. So yes, when people enter the buildings after May 11th, they will be required to have masks on. The next question is, if we reach 1,062 hours but have missed special education service minutes, i.e. occupational therapy, can we expect those service providers to continue to provide direct services under their current contract?
That might be a question. Greta, are you on the phone?
I am. So I think from the contract perspective, that would depend largely on what exactly is written in the contract, and it could potentially depend on what is written in the IP. So if the IP is written as annual minutes, then that ARC would need to convene to determine if services were unable to be provided, what compensatory education services were provided. If it's written that the student will have weekly minutes, and that's a different conversation. So really, this is a conversation that is dependent upon so many independent variables, and each child's IEP and whatever the contracts say, that's also a separate part of the conversation. So we're happy to have this conversation with this person individually, because I don't think there's one standard blanket answer that's appropriate.
Okay.
So give us a call, and then we can work closely with Robin's office to generate the answer on both parts of the contract.
Okay. The next question is, since we are using the 2018-19 data for SEEK, are we also using the 18-19 data for KETS Technology Fund 2 Project 162X code?
Yeah, I think that one we'll have to research. That was a question I'd gotten earlier in the week, and we still need to find an answer on that one.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. The next one is, banked time for certified employees has always counted to fulfill their contracts per KRS 158070, section 12A. Why the change?
So I'm going to ask Todd to respond to this one. We had discussions between the legal office and my office on this topic, and I think even Commissioner Brown kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier in the conversations about why that has been permissible in the past and the difference, or why it's a little different now.
Sure. Thanks, Robin. This question was brought up to us by a school district a week or two ago when we looked into this, and the concept of banked time is one that is really utilized to fulfill the required number of school instructional days, the 170 required school instructional days, so that when a district misses school days that are required as a result of an emergency, they can look back and determine the number of additional hours of instruction that were delivered to students and use those to count toward the number of school days, the 170 school days that are required of them. We're in a unique situation this year in that the General Assembly passed Senate Bill 177 and has kind of taken the required number of school days off the calendar. So whenever KDE is looking to calculate your required 1,062 instructional hours, we're looking at all hours throughout the entire year. Therefore, any amount of time that you may have prior to the COVID-19 emergency considered to be banked time, it's all being utilized to get you to the 1,062 instructional hours. The matter of satisfying your teaching contracts and other contracts to reach their required day requirement, KDE would point you to Senate Bill 177 and the ability for school districts to grant emergency leave to its staff. The contract days are not automatically satisfied by reaching the 1,062 instructional hours. The statute that you referenced does give the local school board the ability to take a look at its calendar and make amendments to it to remove days from that calendar that staff would be required to work. But absent the school district amending its school calendar, the employees would be required to work the full 185 days or utilize emergency leave granted by the board to satisfy those 185 contract days.
Okay. All right. The next question is, let's see here. We're going through there. For those districts who are exploring alternative start calendar for next school year that allows us to waive 170, will those NTI applications for new districts possibly be approved quicker? These NTI days will be needed to start to do a late start calendar.
Hey, this is Kelly. I don't know that your application will be approved any quicker. We have extended the deadline for NTI applications for the 2021 school year. Those will not be due until June the 15th. So we will be processing those as they come in.
Okay. All right, Kelly, and I think that takes care of the other, there was a question, another one on NTI is, will districts have to apply for NTI days if school is unable to start as originally planned, or will the current plan be extended for the start of the next year?
I would highly encourage everyone to complete the new NTI application for the 2021 school year. And if that hasn't already gone out in the Monday email, we'll make sure that it is. But like I said before, the date has been extended to June the 15th to get those applications in. So you will need to complete a new application for the 2021 school year.
Okay, and looks like there's one more on NTI while you're here. How does NTI days count in ADA? Or maybe that's a Robin.
NTI days count as under the relief that was granted under the Education Continuation Plan. They count as a 7-hour day, 420 minutes.
Okay. All right. I will go on to.
I think that may have been also in reference to the attendance. What attendance do you use for an NTI day? I think that may also be touching on that.
Okay. There's a question about a clarification about overtime.
Hold on. So I think we need an answer on that side of it as well. The average daily attendance for an NTI day.
Jay, Rhonda, can you weigh in on that?
We used last year's ADA for the NTI day.
Okay. They wanting some clarification about overtime. They say only non-exempt staff would receive overtime pay, and only for hours worked in excess of 40 in a work week. Like Donna said, it is the same rule we've operated under previously.
I'm not really following that question. Perhaps we can look into that one and get back to them.
Okay.
I'm not really sure what's happening in that context.
I
I think the point being, though, is that for any additional hours worked by staff who are hourly employees, they will be paid their hourly rate for that time.
Okay. The one right next to it says, on the extra pay slide, it states if staff works extra hours, they would receive overtime. Shouldn't we abide by DOL laws that state if an employee works more than 40 hours per week, they'd receive overtime? So I don't know if that's a combination question, or if they were on two different screens.
I think the answer is, and maybe just seeing it on a slide and make them think it's something different. The rules have not changed. So whatever they would have paid overtime on before, they will now. So it's the point we're trying to make on that is that the rules regarding extra pay are the same now as they were before. There's been no change in them.
Okay. We have been told, we have told I'm trying to figure, okay, to use the same year for SAAR. Just said that districts will have a choice of 18-19 or 19-20 for SAAR. Do they have a choice of either or they said that they were told to use the same year?
For purposes of moving forward to determine ADA for funding of SEEK for next school year, they have a choice under Senate Bill 177 to choose either 18-19 or 19-20.
Okay. And then there's a question as to why the quick date of May 15th deadline.
I think the reasons that we are asking for a quick deadline on all these is because the manual calculations that are going to have to take place. The current SEEK system is not designed at all to accommodate these choices in years and then trying to put them together. So we are going to have to do a lot of this very manually. And in order for us to make sure that you can receive payments timely based upon the calculations that are then done, we have to have that information quickly in order to do that. I mean, more than anything, we want to make sure that you are paid in a timely manner based upon whatever path you choose.
Hey, Robin, can I jump in here just a second?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. For that May 15th they're talking about, we're not asking if you decide on a 1920 SAAR, we're not asking for your SAAR data by May 15th. We're just asking for you to let us know which path you're going on by May 15th. Are you going to use your 18-19 SAAR data, or are you planning to submit to us 1920 SAAR data? Like Robin said, that we're going to have to manually calculate. It's kind of so we know what's coming and we can get our ducks in a row for how many we're going to have to manually calculate.
Thank you, Jesse. That's a good clarification. But the quickness, even for that decision, and the reason it has to be made is because then that starts us down. It's almost like you're at a fork in the road and you have to choose one path. And in order for us to do all the things that we need to do to get you to that end goal, that decision on which path in the road you're going to take has to happen very quickly.
Okay. All right. And then I think there's one more, and then some of these other ones I think are going to relate to our next topics, which are graduation and end of year procedures. So we wanted to, the question is about the, shoot, where did it go? It was just here. Somebody must have liked it and it went up onto, okay, let's see. We talked about when the streaming went off, you were talking about staff contract days. I have heard of districts just giving staff 2 weeks off paid. Is this a good thing to do when so many people have lost their jobs?
I think that is, the decisions about that, unfortunately, are hard ones to make by a district. I mean, we do appreciate and understand the fatigue that districts are experiencing, but at the end of the day, your payment of days is for services. And so while they could exercise leave days, or you could get to a point of, again, exercising Senate Bill 177 for emergency days, you could do that. But it would not be a recommendation to just pay staff for services that are not being rendered.
Okay. And then I see another one in here. I don't know if Lauren is on, but there was a question about when districts will be notified if they are have been awarded CEP, which is free lunch program. It was originally set for April 15th.
Lauren, are you on the call?
Before Lauren answers that question, I just want to follow up on the previous question about the paying for the days. We all need to understand the General Assembly has said through its own action and signed by the governor through Senate Bill 177 that it is okay to grant emergency days. So while you shouldn't be, as Robin said, you shouldn't be just turning your head if you know somebody's not working and paying them. If you don't have work for that class of employee, or you get to the end of the year and everybody needs 2 more contract days, but you don't have the services or you don't have things for them to do, the General Assembly has said it's okay that you grant additional emergency days because we understand that we're in an emergency period. So you have the permission of the General Assembly and the governor through a state law to use that mechanism. But we want to encourage you to be as creative as possible. Use the time, use virtual trainings that are out there. There are all kinds of virtual trainings that are available. Co-ops are helping districts find those for all classes of staff to try to use those days in getting prepared for the upcoming year. But if you have to get people to the finish line, it's okay to use an emergency day.
Tony, it looks like Lauren may not be on the Teams meeting, so we can send out additional information about notification of CEP.
Okay, I'll see if I can text her too and maybe get a response by the end of the webcast. I think we could probably do that.
Yeah, I'm doing anything.
Okay, all right, sounds good. And then I think that will lead us to, we'll answer some of these other questions as we go on to our next topic, which is going to be some guidance discussion on graduations and related year-end activities. And Kevin's going to go ahead and just kind of lead us into this discussion, and then and then into our next one as well.
Sure. Thank you, Tony, and thank Robin and your team. Thank you again for the great presentation. And I know we were way down into the weeds, and we needed to be on those issues. So thank you for that. And for all the questions. Those are great questions coming in. Thank you. And first I want to apologize. I told you we would have guidance to you by close of business, written guidance for the areas of end of year activities, return of materials, how that process should work as far as abiding by the public health restrictions as well as graduation guidance. We are going to provide that to you today in very broad and general terms on the webcast. We are waiting final approval. We're working with the administration on these documents, and I anticipated that we would have that sooner rather than later, and our staff worked all weekend on getting the documents ready, and it's my responsibility, and so I take ownership of not having it to you in time, but we think that will be coming to you in hopefully the next 24 hours. So, but we are going to still talk about it and talk about the general school closure process as far as getting students back into the building. There will be a need for that at least at some levels, particularly high school or those students that have lockers that need to be cleaned out and the things you need to follow there. I think Amanda Ellis is going to talk about that. And then Tony is going to guide us through also the overview of the graduation guidance.
Okay. You want me to go ahead and start? So I will go through and read some of the items that are on this page, and I'm going to go ahead and share. There's not much to share other than the slide that you guys have. So as the school year comes to a close, we have kind of come up with a few recommendations. And again, these are just guidelines for graduation ceremonies and related year-end activities. We encourage our districts to engage with students and families on the best solution for your community during this time. The following processes and guidelines will help you determine what is best, and it will help you assess the needs and challenges and possible solutions. Step 1, examine each year-end event as it relates to your district and your school's mission and values. Sorry, I lost connection there for a second. Step 2 is considering alternative scenarios for each mission critical event. If you've decided which events to preserve this school year, consider alternative scenarios that you can use. And keep in mind Governor Beshear's executive order that prohibits mass gatherings and requires any gathering to the extent possible to comply with guidance from the CDC. There are a couple of options that we've outlined. So option A is a virtual or drive-in ceremony. In a virtual ceremony, diplomas, awards, honors can be conferred virtually or by way of a drive-in ceremony. This option the virtual ceremony would be easiest in keeping with social distancing guidelines. The one that we're referring to, a couple of them, but several of you have asked about the Gulfport School District in Mississippi, and they have come up with a great plan that closely mirrors the traditional graduation ceremony. You can choose to model your plan after theirs, as long as it keeps within social distancing guidelines, while allowing students to share the experience with families. There is a 2-page guidance document that details how the Gulfport plan works that we will link to this. However, if this model is used, the governor's office requires staff and students to wear personal protective equipment. And according to the Department of Public Health, cloth masks are sufficient in this case. And I want to make sure that that's reiterated because we did check with both the cabinet and the governor's office. If you go ahead and use this particular model, PPE must be used. So again, you will get this guidance and it gives you all of these things that you can use for this particular model. And there's a couple more ideas on here as well. For a drive-in ceremony, this would allow for students, families, faculty, and staff to celebrate in the same location while keeping within social distancing guidelines. Governor Beshear said he is not opposed to drive-in services as long as vehicles stay at least 6 feet apart and contain no more than a single family that lives together. He has also said no one should leave the car and should pass anything between cars. This situation may be more feasible for a smaller school, but much more difficult for larger schools. And multiple ceremonies within smaller groups might have to be held to accommodate all students. However, this option could pose the most logistical challenges. And then we have several bullet points listed in terms of what you would need to consider. Option B is you could reschedule the event for summer when campuses could reopen. And that is, again, pending what recommendations come in through the governor's office via the health department. Within option A or B, we have some considerations for events that would be held in person. If a district or school chooses to hold an event in person, several factors have to be considered. Be sure to convey the expectations to protect health and safety in advance and reiterate those before the start of the ceremony. Ensure that you have enough staff or other support to enforce the policies if needed. Masks and temperature checks. Public health officials recommend that masks must be worn. And again, cloth masks will suffice in this situation. Schools must also take the temperature of staff before any interaction with students and guests. If someone has a temperature of more than 100 degrees, they are considered to have a fever and must return home. Temperatures of students and guests can be taken before entry, but this could be a time-consuming procedure that is not possible for all schools due to the number of students. And no one should come to a graduation event if they are experiencing any symptoms of respiratory illness, including fever or cough. Crowd size is another situation or another thing that needs to be considered.
Tony, let me interrupt. I just want to make sure everybody's clear when Tony's talking about guests. that's under two situations. That's under the Gulfport model. If you were only to have 4 or 5 individuals of immediate family members around the student, or if you were doing a delayed ceremony into the summer or early fall when we were into a different phase of the reopening, and that we could have, there was actually permitted under the social distancing guidelines to have a small event. That's what we're talking about guests. When we're saying it, you need to take the guest temperature, that's not saying that you can have a normal event right now with 500 people. As long as you take their temperature, then that event's okay. That's not what that's saying.
That is correct. That is correct, because the crowd size comes into play as well. And this, again, will be specified in the document that you will receive, because even with the limited number of staff, or the limited number of people with a graduate, you still have to maintain the social distancing, and it is a very limited number of people that would be allowable. And under crowd size, it is expected that some form of social distancing will have to be observed for the foreseeable future, and the crowd size will have to be limited. Currently, groups larger than 10 total are prohibited, according to the CDC. Therefore, depending on the number of students, you will likely have to hold more than one event in the same venue to decrease the size of a crowd. The ceremony would need to be repeated as many times as necessary to accommodate all graduates and permitted guests. Keep in mind, for very large classes, this could mean very many ceremonies. And again, that number of 10 would include if you have a superintendent, if you have a principal, if you have a board member, that includes that number of 10. So again, when you're keeping your numbers limited, and every one of those people would have to be wearing PPE under the guidance from the governor's office and the health department.
And Tony, I would interject here, and I've gotten a text from a superintendent. I want to reiterate right now that in all of these options, even the virtual option, even a virtual option where you're going to recognize students only through a technology platform like we're using right now, you must involve your local health department, because a virtual option will require a certain number of administrators to be in a certain location to have the ceremony, or have the actual, or read a speech, or deliver a speech, or something like that. So, or to make the presentation. And so you don't want to have 30 administrators or a combination of teachers and administrators in one room, for example, because you're doing a virtual ceremony and it's being recorded in some place. So that's why it's important to have health department involvement. The superintendent that just emailed me talked about how their local health department, for example, has given guidance to them that if they use the Gulfport model, that they would be permitted to temporarily take off the PPE for a picture. The student would be able to do that. So that's coming from a local health expert. Again, you need to have that. If you don't already have a relationship with your local health department, you need to do so. Then you need to consult with them on any type of end of year activity that you're going to be engaged in, because there are things about your community that only you and your local health department know about and are aware of. And then there are parts of your school campuses that only local officials know about. And that can become very important when you're talking about moving cars in and out. Let's say you have one of your schools has a large parking lot, but another school has smaller parking lots around the building, and you can't get everybody into one parking lot for a drive-through. I mean, all of those things your local health department will have to advise you on situations like that, and making sure you're maintaining the distance even between cars.
Correct. And then which leads to the next question, the next issue, whether you choose whether you want to go and consider the A or B scenario, is the issue of spacing, and that remembering that social distancing needs to be observed for health and safety reasons, and that graduates, guests, and staff will be adequately have to be spaced out in all directions. You're going to need to calculate capacity in advance for 6-foot spacing between people. You're going to have to mark the standing locations of graduates waiting to collect diplomas. Limit or prevent guests from crowding near the stage. You'll have to have everything, kind of planned out to a T, just to make sure that there is no there's no gathering, and that everybody maintains that 6-foot space. Consider other factors such as the use of restrooms and access, and how those using them will be spaced out. An entrance door and an exit door is recommended for any event. The handing out of diplomas, you will need to consider how diplomas will be collected and when a student's name is called. For example, staff could place the diploma on a table and the student could walk across the stage, collect the diploma from the table, pose for a picture individually, or appropriately distanced from a school official.
And again, what Tony's describing is the Gulfport model. You cannot use some of this guidance is not applicable to every scenario. We do not yet have confirmation as to whether or not a student is going to be permitted to get out of the car for a drive-in ceremony. The drive-in ceremonies are going to have perhaps hundreds of cars. And during a church service with hundreds of cars, it is currently not permitted for anyone to get out of the car, as I understand it, even for a restroom break. So that's why we don't have the written document to you right now, is because we are still working out some of these issues and vetting them with the administration. We want to get you that type of information, but you've got to read this guidance very carefully, because some of the things Tony's describing is not applicable to every type of ceremony.
Right. There's a lot of things to consider for every single situation, and it really depends on your school size, the number of graduates, and the space that you have available. So your other option is to reimagine the event entirely. If it becomes necessary to push an event into the fall or beyond, you might want to reimagine it completely. You could virtually confer the diplomas during the summer months, with a graduation celebration hosted during the 2020 holiday break when college students return for home or vacation, but keep in mind that restrictions may last some time. Step 3 in this entire process is to develop a communication plan. Ensure that you consider in your plan the needs of all parties: students, families, faculty, staff, and the community. You will need to determine who needs to be involved in the decision making and how best to involve all parties and ensure transparency in the process. Once the plan has been determined and you have discussed it with local public health officials, communicate it to all as soon as possible and consider how best to do this. As you communicate your plan, ensure that you convey that school leaders are committed to honoring the students and your graduates and celebrating their achievements. We all know that these milestones are extremely important to our students and their families, and we all know how proud we all are of every single one of them. Step 4 is to be flexible and understand that your plan might still need to change as the pandemic evolves. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced educators to be flexible and innovative in addressing the unexpected. In time, your plan B may not be possible, and it may be time to have a plan C, D, or E. And a perfect example of this is just yesterday. We, with the governor announcing that May 11th with the face masks, yesterday this document didn't have May 11th face masks in it. So, every day things are changing. And this document is just meant to be guidance and really a place for you to go to really ask yourself, here are some questions that I need to consider when I'm planning an event or when I'm trying to see what I can do for my seniors. That's all that this really is meant and designed to be. And that's really what we're trying to do here. During your planning process, we encourage you to get creative and see this as an opportunity rather than a disappointment. Faculty and staff have come up with innovative ways to teach students during the pandemic, and that creativity can be applied to graduation and other year-end events. Like many things in life, what seems negative at the time can have a silver lining. So see what you can do to come up and be creative, meaningful, and enjoyable ways to give back to your students and families and have some positive memories while we can during this time as the school year ends. There are some ideas to get you started. You could hold a graduation parade where graduates decorate their cars. You could ask seniors to send individual videos with short messages to their graduating classmates. You could put them together with traditional film speeches by invited guests and create a film. You could highlight individual seniors on social media each day with photos and messages to include special hashtags. You could host an early reunion in the spring or summer of 2021. So these are all just ideas and again, just guidance that can help you as you go about planning any kind of recognitions or end of year graduation ceremonies. And Kevin, if you want to take over, that's all I have on that document.
No, Tony, that's a good summary. Again, just to reiterate, we will be getting you a document. The document does exist. It is in draft form and being finalized. We are making sure that we have the best feedback from other partners in government, at state government levels, to make sure that it's accurate and that we have the most up-to-date information for you. And as Tony said, you just need to know that there will likely be other versions of this document that come out. The document, when you get it, will have a version date on it. We will obviously let you know and broadcast it widely if we have to issue another version, because we know that this could change. And it could be that it could change for the better as far as lesser restrictions as we move down, and we could change it in that way. I know that it's a very frustrating time. I know you're getting a lot of pressure and from parents and families about what that very important milestone event will be in your community. And that's why we wanted to go ahead and talk about it, even though we don't have the document finalized, but it will be coming out very, very soon this week, hopefully within the next 24 hours or so. And then Amanda, I think you're going to briefly touch on, there's a second guidance document that deals with end of year pickup of or drop off of materials by students.
Yes. So just as Kevin said, it's really just to help districts think through because you have so many decisions that are being made right now, just to think through some possible scenarios with how you will have folks come in and out of your building. And really, this could even be something, once the document's in your hand, it's just considerations for even how you think about approaching the fall. And it's just a different way of how we're working. So one of the things that I'll just touch on the highlights of what we encouraged in some of the guiding questions. As you all know, as Kevin said, this is guidance. Ultimately, you all have to make the decisions that work best for your district in partnership with your public health officials and department. We don't know what your size is. We don't know if your school is huge or small. We don't know if you have 400 graduates or 40. So it really all depends on what best meets your needs and what physical space that you actually have available to do things. So one of the things we do is we just bring out some things to think about as you're talking about students coming to drop off their things or pick up, especially with their sports equipment or Chromebooks, textbooks, their materials they may have left in their lockers. Many teachers have said, if I'd known that was their last day, I'd see them for the rest of the year, I would have done X. And I'm sure many of your building administrators would have said, I would have had them take what was in their lockers. You know, so there's just a lot of things, probably personal belongings that need to be picked up and those that need to be dropped off. So one of the things we're really emphasizing is creating a schedule. So clearly, depending on the size of your building, it's almost like an approach that Lowe's and Kroger are using that folks are spaced out. They don't all show up at one time. It will be so hard to have everybody come and not be able to talk and hang out and visit with folks that they haven't seen in a long time. This includes your staff, but really creating a schedule, whether that's online or that may be by alphabet. If you're in elementary or a middle school, be very careful not to do that with grade level, because if you have a whole class of 24 second graders show up plus their moms or dads with them, that would not be a good way to do it. So you just have to think about your schedule. And so we have some guidance on that. Limits on who can accompany students. We know that the younger the student, more adults have to be involved, but really limit. You don't want a family of 6 or 7 to come in just for one child to pick things up. And for many of your families, school is their safe place. And so including the parents. So just really have to be clear on who can come with the student, almost like the approach that many of the stores are taking now. Mask, as we've already talked about, would be required, especially at this time, and temperature tests. So as you're thinking about that, who would you have man that station? Where would it be? How would that work? complying with social distancing. And we have in the guidance that you'll receive the executive orders that align with that. So you'll see exactly what the governor has said to ensure that your procedures are aligned with what is required in our state. And even with the caregivers, are you going to provide masks if they don't have them? How do you go about doing that? So thinking through a lot of the logistics are really important to keep everyone safe and to keep the schedule that you have to maintain social distancing, yet still be able to retrieve your materials and get what you need done to close out the year. Even cleaning and disinfecting things. Once people come, we know that any surfaces that are touched. I know when I was in Walmart the other day, even on the conveyor belt and some of my food items, they wipe down the conveyor belt before they'd even let the next person place things on it. So you have to figure out what surfaces would be used, a check-in or check-out process to ensure you're not having too many folks in the building at once or everybody lined up to turn in a textbook. You have to really man that. Parking in the parking lots. That sounds like, well, that's not our issue. It is. When they enter, it's very easy for a child and their parent to see another friend that maybe they haven't seen in a long time in person, or two friends run to hug and they want to hang out. You have to really man your parking lot. Many of our offices, as you know, our doctor offices are actually asking folks to stay in their car until they've been asked to come out to enter the building. That may be a process you want to use, but we do have that in the considerations document, even to the point of where you place your trash cans to make sure if folks are throwing stuff away from lockers and how you handle that. The other logistics basically is what we do is in the guidance, we have questions to ask. Where will students enter and exit? If they are distributing food and they want to do pickup at the same time, where are those locations and how do you man the masses? How long will they be allowed to stay in the building? For some of your seniors to come pick up cords or their cap and gown, it's going to be really hard to not want to stay and talk to their teachers and hang out or walk through the halls again. What's the duration of time that they can be there? How will you use your staff? So many of you are going, I don't know what to do with them those last couple of days. You may need your staff with specific roles and specific locations. They can't hang out and congregate either, but to ensure that you have all of their areas covered. So many of you are good with this. If you have ever had to manage state tournaments somewhere with the parking, or if you've ever had to do open house or any kind of large convening on your school grounds, this is second nature. But what would be different is how you socially distance and to ensure the use of PPE and the safety of your staff and your visitors. But it really is just walking through where will staff be located, what are their roles, who will control the traffic, just a lot of logistical thinking. Social distancing, almost to what Tony had mentioned about things you place on the floor to ensure folks are staying far enough apart, just really monitoring that. Number of people coming in, do you have the same exit as the entrance? How do you accommodate disabilities? So whether it's students or family members who may need accommodations for physical disabilities or any additional assistance, whether it's cognitive or physical disabilities that they may need additional help. What are your protocols for that? What do you do with the materials that are left over if you have no-shows? Are you alternating your hours for families who are working during the days and can only come in the evening? Just something to think about with that. And if they don't show up at all, how do you get them their material or their belongings? How do you retrieve their belongings? Communication. How will you communicate what this looks like, how this will work? Do you have time allotted to do so? So really, these are just some logistical things to think through how you will retrieve your items. I've seen that some districts have already done this. You've already worked with your public health department. You've already distributed some of your things.
Dr. Ellis, you still there? We may have lost her there for a minute.
I do want to, until she gets back on, I do want to again reiterate the importance of, as Amanda just mentioned, working with your local health department. That does not just apply to the graduation event or alternative events that you may be planning. You need to make sure you partner with your local health department about the end of school year procedures as well. There may be things or risks in your community that your local health department is aware of that you're not, that you need to be making special procedures for perhaps maybe a school in a community where there's been an increase or a higher number of cases than another, and so only your local health department can help guide you on that. So make sure, again, you need to continue that conversation with your local health department as you're planning this type of event. Dr. Ellis,
Kevin,
are you back on?
Yes, I have been dropped twice today. I think that's I apologize, and I don't have time, but I apologize for dropping. But one of the things I want to make sure folks think about is that, as Tony was talking about, with it being graduation and other awards, I know a lot of folks are thinking about how to celebrate students at the end of the year and recognize them for their attendance, for their hard work, even the staff and things. So just as Kevin said, this is just really solid guidance to help you think through all the many decisions you're having to think through. And it doesn't just have to be for graduating seniors or just one thing or the other, but just to think through what your protocols are going to look like moving forward and being well prepared. That's ultimately what we want to make folks find information in one place and be able to move ahead in a most efficient way. So Kevin, I'm sorry it dropped on us again, and I pretty much have been finished. So thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. Tony, I think do we have questions coming in on this?
Yes, we do. So we'll go ahead and go back to the soapbox. And I think one of the first questions that I saw that came in was about with this mask requirement. Let me go back up there. Now that we know that masks must be worn in our buildings starting May 11th, will the district have to provide the masks to their employees?
Todd, that's as everyone knows, I left my legal hat hanging in Jefferson County. From a non-legal perspective, if you are requiring employees to come in, I believe you need to provide them a mask. Again, I don't think this is the N95 we're talking about. We're talking about the cloth masks that were talked about yesterday in the governor's webinar. My guess is most of your employees will already have obtained those on their own anyway, because it's going to be a requirement to get into the dollar store or Walmart or other places that they may go for essentials. Todd, is there a legal angle to that I've missed?
Kevin, not that I know of. We can look into it, but I think that, districts can certainly ask those employees who may have masks to bring them with them. But then for the employees who don't have a mask and the employees being required to report to work, the district should likely make provisions to provide that mask.
Okay. This question has been asked 3 times, and it has been like 3 times. So I don't know, if everyone else is wearing a mask, can the senior take it off in the Gulfport model while they were walking across the stage? So again,
we're going to defer to your local public health official on that determination. And I think we'd already heard from one superintendent where they had already received some guidance from their local health official, and we just need to be prepared that there may be some differing guidance by various local health departments. They are uniquely situated, and they have a understanding of the health situation in that county or that area, and so we really need to make sure that we are abiding by their guidance as they're giving it to you.
And that's correct. When we had talked to the health department over the weekend, that is one, the state health department, that is one thing that they mentioned, is that the local health departments are the experts in their local community. So if one particular county health department says that this is acceptable or this is okay here, that doesn't mean that the next door health department feels comfortable that will be acceptable there. So that is why that throughout both of these guidance documents, it is emphasized heavily that you need to check with your local health department, so that and your local board attorneys, both of those, to make sure that you are just to make sure that you're good in good standing with that. The next question that we have on this would be, let's see here. Has KDE been given any guidance on how long it will take the state to get through phase 2? The option to have graduation in summer seems impossible.
We don't have that, and that is based on data, of course, getting to those numbers and getting to those guidelines. But I've not heard any estimation or on that from an official source at all.
Okay. And then there was a question if the governor was going to share this information on one of his addresses. I believe that is the plan, but we're not entirely sure. Let's see, going down here to the next question. Do graduation plans have to be submitted and approved by the Kentucky Department of Education? The answer is no. Correct, Kevin?
That's correct.
Okay, just making sure. At what point do we stop serving food with all of these new restrictions and concerns that have been expressed?
I'm not sure what there are new restrictions as far as the masks issue that the governor talked about yesterday. I don't know that any of the things we're talking about, including the requirement that everyone wear masks out in public, would mean that your food services through summer feeding or other programs should cease. You have to obviously make those judgments there locally. Robin, do you have additional thoughts? I do know that, and this is also related to the mask issue. One superintendent commented, of course, many of you donated, and we did as well through Kentucky School for the Deaf and Blind, Kentucky School for the Deaf, School for the Blind, as well as the area technology centers donated a lot of PPE, which we should have, and I'm glad we did. But those were N95 masks, or the majority of those, and the mask requirement in yesterday that the governor talked about, those are non-N95, or they don't have to be N95 masks.
Correct. Another question is, can the principal take a mask off to announce the senior's name? Again, I think that needs to, you need to check with your local health department on that. All of our guidelines are meant just to be guidelines on that. So any specific questions on a local graduation would need to be, you need to do that in conjunction with your local health department. Going back up to, is Robin still on? Robin and her staff?
We are still on. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I'm having some audio problems there for a minute.
That's all right. Let me see, there's a couple of questions that were, is there an approximate dollar amount per day on transportation funding?
No, it varies by district.
Okay.
There's if you go to the spreadsheet that's available on our website, on the far right side, you'll see a calculated cost per pupil day that is specific to your district, and that was from the prior year. And that assumed 170 plus days typically transported. That assumed that all your transportation expenditures are pretty normal. But to the right of that, you'll see a graph adjusted calculated cost per pupil day. And this is where we have to kind of squeeze everybody's transportation calculation inside. And that's sort of the black box that we don't really know. If you are transporting 140 days, what will happen to your formula at that point? Because the formula will look for efficiency, and that is to say you're transporting more kids for less money, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the problem with saying, well, it's usually $3.50 a day. That is all now going to be very different in this next calculation if you use 1920 data with less T codes, less expenditures, and less days transported.
Okay. The next question is, we were required to do a Title I survey and meeting for parents. How should we handle that this year?
Hi, this is Kelly. If you're talking about something that's required for the 1920 school year, we'll definitely work with you on that. Obviously, it can't be a face-to-face, but if you have the capacity to do something online, if you also want to reach out to me directly via email, that way I can clarify your question a little bit better.
Okay. They would like some guidance on SBDM elections for both staff and parents. There's some SBDM members that'll be rotating off, and they want to know how they're to proceed with SBDM elections.
So your site-based decision-making coordinators in your district has received guidance from us. We are suggesting that all of that take place online. We know that is a challenge for some, and we are looking at ways to possibly have a tool or something available for you all to use. So check back with your district site-based coordinators, and if they haven't received something, please reach back out to me, Kelly Foster, and I'll make sure that both of you receive that.
There's a question, how can students pick up items from school if they can't pick up a diploma at a drive-through graduation?
The issue, and again, we're finalizing this guidance, but the issue with the drive-up graduation, and as I just from listening to the governor repeat guidance from public health, the issue with the churches having the drive-ins, and then as applied if we had a graduation drive-in, is that you have a potential of 100 vehicles times 4 people is the potential of 400 people in a small parking lot, even though all cars are 6 feet apart. And so you're raising the risk of a person walking in that environment and being tempted to do a high five to their friend's car, etc. So that's the thinking, as opposed to an individual student getting an individual appointment with their parent or guardian or themselves, if they are can get there themselves, to be in a building with only other people, a limited number of staff there, so they can at a very safe distance retrieve belongings from a locker. That is a very different scenario than the previous one I described about a drive-up service. That I think that is where the public health concern is coming in.
Okay. People asking for a copy of all the slides that were sent to the superintendents. If you did not receive a copy of the slides and are interested in getting a copy of those, you can email me. That's tony.tatman@education.ky.gov. And I will be happy to get you a copy of today's presentation. And then the next question is relevant to registration for preschool usually occurs towards the end of March, and we begin RIT. When should we do our RTI? When should we do RTI for these students?
This is Greta. I'm not sure that I completely understand the question, unless we're talking about possibly the screening that occurs following the registration. But if this person would reach out to either me, Greta Hilton, or Andrea Bartholomew, then we're happy to discuss it further.
Okay, great. And then there was another question about NTI days, and they said that they were under the impression that if they wanted to continue for the 2021 year, that they just needed the superintendent to email Steve Kissinger to let him know their intent. Is that correct? And Dr. Foster had said earlier that if you want
Tony,
to,
let me clarify. I was going to ask to clarify. So there will be something, an upcoming Monday email, and there'll be 2 different application processes. One is for a returning NTI district. And if you were a returning NTI district during the 1920 school year, due to the changes in regulation, you were able to just send something in saying that you wanted to follow your plan for 18-19 as well. So there'll be a specific link in the Monday email for what you need to complete. If you just became an NTI district during this emergency, there'll be another link in that Monday email message for you to apply as an NTI district for the 2021 school year. So in the guidance that both of these are already on our website, but we're going to put it in the Monday email. That way it will be right there in front of you, and you will be able to determine between the two links as far as which one that you need to complete.
And Kelly, this is in Kevin's Monday message, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think that will wrap us up for questions. If you want to close us out, it's 3:57.
Tony, this is Robin Kinney.
Oh, okay, go ahead, Robin.
Additional thing. Since the announcement of our web calls, or our team meetings that we're doing for the finance officers and the DPPs, we've already had a lot of interest in others wanting to join those calls. And if I had thought to talk to David Couch about this before, he's probably, if he was close, closer than 6 feet apart, he would be kicking me under the table right now, because we do have some capacity constraints. And so we'll work through those, because we do want to make people that want to participate in those calls to be able to hear. I'd asked my staff to go ahead and send out the meeting invites for those. So the district finance officers and DPPs will be receiving those, but we may need to change the way we deliver that information if we get above a certain number. So if we don't get that to you immediately, it will be coming, and we will be having those team meetings for finance officers and for DPPs. Just wanted to make sure that you knew it was coming.
Okay.
Thank you,
Robin.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll close this out. I'm going to close this out on a positive note for a change. Robin, also to your team, thank you. Tony, Dr. Ellis, and others, and of course, all the folks behind the scenes, OET, and all of our other staff to make this work. Appreciate that. So today, in today's Wall Street Journal, there was an article that's titled "Some School Districts Plan to End the Year Early, Call Remote Learning Too Tough." And that article does not mention Kentucky for good reason. It talks about some other states that thought that this was too tough. And when we were talking about this, many of you talked to me about how it was going to be tough. And I wanted you to do that, and I'm glad you did that. But after the decision was made and the governor recommended that we continue to get to 1,062 hours, which is a full instructional year, and yes, we have a little grace there with the 7 hours, not one district complained. And I'm talking about the districts that are going to the end of May. So if you have a chance, you can read that article about some of the other states that are finding it too tough. And the kids in Kentucky are better for it because you all are rising to the occasion, and it is tough. And I know it's wearing on everyone, but I'm proud of us as Kentuckians, and as I refer to it as the education family. So thank you for all you're doing. Have a good day.